Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the writer and journalist. It is the one and only Neil Taylor from the NME days. And he was one of the three people who put together the famous, infamous cassette C86 many decades ago, which has gone on to be very popular. And Cherry Red Records has been recently going through the decade, or through the years, bringing out C87 right up to C91. But, big but there, next month, October 2022, they are going to put together a compilation, or they have put together a compilation titled C85. It's another triple CD box set that's going to feature such bands as Jesus and the Mary Chain, the Stone Roses, That Petrol Emotion, Woodentops, James, the Housemartins, and many, many more. Again, brilliantly put together, beautiful booklet design, and also an introduction by the one and only Neil Taylor. Yes, indeed. So this is it, my interview with Neil that we had very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other stuff. So this is it. After several minutes of casual chat, we got down to that exciting subject that was the original, where it all started really, which was C86. I know there is a C81 as well. But I was just talking about the fact that when he did that cassette with, I believe, Adrian Thrills and also Roy Carr, they had no idea that it was going to be such a successful cassette. And anyway, and talking about various bands that were on the cassette itself. So this is Neil picking up that conversation. Neil, take it away.
Well, of course, the thing is that the C86, unlike many of the other NME cassettes, including C81, was wholly independent. There was nothing on that cassette that wasn't independent. Nothing was distributed by a major. It was all done on independent terms. And there were bands on there, you've mentioned Fuzzbox, who I don't think had got a record out, or had only just got a record out. So it was a strange beast. It was immediately derided. But at the same time as certain factions derided it, it just continued to keep selling until it went on to become the biggest selling cassette that they issued. I mean, there were a couple of charity cassettes that probably sold more, but or records, charity records.
Yes. So
in a way, it was inexplicable, but I think it was done for all the right reasons, and there was a sort of honesty about it, even if there was a naivety about it.
Yeah. And also, when with the people that you asked, not everybody accepted the kind offer to be on it, like the famous June Brides moment, which obviously was quite interesting. And also, most people now say they gave you the worst of their kind of material to put on the cassette as well, which was even more bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine what the cassette would have been like if we'd got Felt on there with Primitive Painters? I mean, that's not my particularly favourite track by Felt, but that's obviously from Time, or even something from Forever Breathe the Lonely Word. If we got television personalities on there, if the Mighty Lemon Drops had given us Like an Angel, if McCarthy had given us, anything but the track they gave us.
So yes, I know a few people. So who else rejected? Did anybody else reject the offer of being on the cassette?
I don't think so, but I do know that there were many. There were many bands that we missed that perhaps we should have been talking to and we weren't talking to. I mean, this was all done in quite a rush. I think the first meeting we had was between Christmas and the New Year of 1986. So, 1985 was just over. The cassette came out in May, and obviously in the period in between, they had to do all the clearances. We selected the tracks, but I know I'm sort of, usually prominently associated with C86, but there was a sort of broad input, certain bands, for instance, I remember Age of Chance, that wasn't an inclusion of mine. It would gladly have been an inclusion of mine, but Don Watson brought that to the table, and there was sort of so it was put together to be what it was intended to be, which was, I say, is a cassette, a marketing tool that would be replaced in 12 weeks by another one.
Yes. And did you have, looking back, do you slightly regret not putting any of the Welsh bands? Because I remember John Peel at that stage was playing a lot of music from Welsh indie bands like Daft Bluggy. Did that sort of cross your thought pattern?
There were many things that should have crossed our minds that didn't.
Yes. So then, with that wonderful world, it doesn't die. It kind of keeps getting stronger and stronger. And now people are writing books about it. And a lot of those bands are still about sort of now writing their memoirs about that period. Then Cherry Red Records picks up and decides, I think there's been a few compilations, but they then bring out the C86, but with the triple CD box set, don't they? Which is 66 songs. And then that's such a good idea. They keep going forward in
That's
time
right.
to 91.
I mean, Cherry Red have done a magnificent job, really, in keeping the flame alight and just digging out all this stuff and making sure it doesn't get lost. I mean, initially they'd started with the first box set that covered the pre-86, pre-C86, and then John Reid came to me with the idea of possibly putting together C86, which we didn't think we'd be able to do because we didn't think we'd get the clearances. But in the end, I spoke to a few people and we did manage to get the clearances. So it went C86 and then it went C87, C88, C89, C90, C91. And now it's come full circle and we've come back to C85, which I think covers, at least in terms of C86, probably the most significant year.
Yes. And is it the case, and this is only a dream, is it a case of going back to the very beginning, probably C81, but also C80, just to sort of tidy the whole project up?
Well, I think we did look at the idea of reissuing C81, which I think would be lovely, but the sort of legal implications of trying to untie the mess that has become. We didn't think we'd be able to achieve it. You've only got one or two key bands missing, and you can't really.
Right.
Honestly.
So as a sort of a casual punter, in a way, so what are the problems of putting these things together? Because it always seems like, passing of time.
It's a question of who owns the rights and will they use the rights.
And that can be quite.
And it's been identified with C81 that there are certain rights that belong to, certain companies, and the companies aren't willing to sort of release them.
Right, blimey! It's a murky world. Even 40 years later, it can still be dragging on.
It can be, yes. Yeah, gladly I don't get involved in any of that. The guys at Cherry Red do all that.
I would imagine they're very good. So your contribution is often, are you the go-to person for writing sleeve notes and the general information about all the bands and all the particular record?
Well, they use me occasionally. Well, not occasionally. I mean, they've used me quite a lot to write the sleeve notes to these compilations. I wouldn't say I'm the sort of go-to expert on every band on every compilation. Certainly, John Reid at Cherry Red is pretty well informed in that respect. But they sort of come to me to sort of try to get a flavour of the period that we're talking about.
Yes.
I mean, beginning with C86. I mean, I didn't do the sleeve notes for C91. I mean, I think it would be wrong of me to do that because by the time it got to 91, I was less involved, let's say.
Yes, the zeitgeist had gone. Because when I, reading your book, which is one of the most kind of kind of amazing detail, amazingly, you had to be there. You obviously didn't do, you didn't sort of have to go and read, go to the library and find notes. You do have an amazing depth of all the things that happen. Was this your zeitgeist period, the kind of the mid-80s? Was this kind of where you were out every night, going to every little gig, every little, venue to see these bands who nobody else was interested in?
Yeah, to some extent that's true. But I started writing for the Enemy in 1983. And it was an interesting time to start because, of course, post-punk was still, you know, on the blocks and it still had some traction, but it was very clearly running out of steam, so to speak. Then 1984 was an interesting year because, of course, there were so many fractious moments. We had the miners' strike, you had Thatcherism, everything was sort of falling apart. Even the music press was on strike for a long period. And I think it was coming back from that strike, which was during the summer of 1984, that everybody realized it was time to draw a line. Something new had to come along, had to develop, had to come out of this. And I think a lot of those C86 bands, that was their sort of genesis, really, that back end of 1984. Very few of those bands on C86. I think I've written somewhere that there's something like 17 out of the 22, I think I'm right in saying,
yes.
that either formed or released their first record in 1985. Primal Scream, so on and so forth. And some of them obviously have been around a lot longer, but not many. So I think it was interesting. And then, of course, towards the end of the year, Live Aid came along, which was a very worthy enterprise that was sort of taken up in a slightly unworthy way when you saw these sort of bourgeois pop stars effectively furthering their own career, and that, I think, drove enough people away from the state of rock to want to go on and do something different, or at least turn away from the direction that they'd previously been facing, and appear to put themselves into the ghetto that then developed into sort of the indie rock that C86 became the forerunner of.
Yes, well, it was interesting, a few things you mentioned there, because I did an interview with Nick Kent recently, or probably last year, and he was saying that when he started writing, I think whether it was the NME or another music paper, this was the kind of early-ish 70s, and he said most of the writers who were all there and had been there for a while were kind of waiting for the Beatles to reform, and they weren't really interested in punk or the beginnings of punk. So it was almost like you can see that people do have a bit of a zeitgeist moment that it's going to be there 5 years. And then after that, like you were saying, C91, you just feel like, well, that's not my bag. That's another young person.
Moved on by then. I think that's quite a good point. 5 years. 5 years really, for me, is the limit that anyone should be a music journalist, because you need to be enthusiastic and you need to be passionate about this. And some of these guys that have been on these magazines for 20 years, they do run out of steam. I mean, you saw that on the NME with people in the 80s. When the Smiths came along, I mean, this obviously was a great shot in the arm for independent music, a wonderful band, and but you could see the older journalists trying to figure out how they could fit this new band that lots of young kids were getting into the schema, which was really quite conservative and quite staid. I think they were able to do that with the Smiths because the Smiths were a relatively traditional band. They had more difficulty when, say, a band like the Jesus and Mary Chain came along, because that was a shock to the system, and they weren't sure how to respond.
Yeah, well, I think, but with the Smiths, I think they did shock people because people didn't like the whiny lyrics. They didn't like it. He can't sing. So I did sort of notice that people from that punk and post-punk period never got into the Smiths. They just didn't like it, and that was just, it was a bit feminine. You know, there was the vegetarian thing. It just blew people's minds. So that was it. And also, I think during that early '80s period, you know, there was like the Falkland Crisis, miners' strike, Greenham Common. And there was a huge amount of unemployment. So you had on one side the people who bought into Thatcherism and were doing well, and the other side who were all these 16, 18-year-olds who were unemployed doing job seekers allowance, enterprise allowance schemes, having that 1 year of kind of almost an indirect grant, but then sort of playing music and thinking, well, we're not that great. But they had the gatekeepers, you know, and you had the music press, but you had John Peel, and that I think gave people that ability to think, well, at least we could get played on John Peel, and that will be our career. And it's, oh, we got a John Peel session, and then every city and town in the, you know, in the UK, which is a tiny little country, has an alternative independent indie night, doesn't it? So you can get that little tour bus. So by 85, 86, there is this kind of culture that's kind of built up for a few more years. And I think that created the scene. But like you mentioned, Live Aid, there was on the other side, you know, you had daytime radio one with Simon Bates, DLT, you know, Steve Wright in the afternoon, all these kind of love songs. You know, there was all Phil Collins, you know, Sade, you know, that production sound of Trevor Horn. So it was very easy, I think, for a person like myself to enjoy the noise and the slight mess of it all, you know. So I think there was a kind of a moment, really, and you were obviously there at the NME, embracing,
Well,
going to all these indie nights.
it's interesting what you mentioned about unemployment because that's very, very important, obviously. Um, and tying that into Live Aid, I remember, I think it was Steve Wright. I hope I've got this right and we don't get sued. Who, you know, sort of, I remember him playing the Live Aid single, and um, and then moments later, regaling us with how he was going to go on a Christmas shopping trip to Italy, and it's like the Ethiopian cause was worthy. The shopping trip to Italy was a complete irrelevance. But that just goes to show, you see. I mean, nothing Bob Geldof did, was done for the wrong reasons, but it just gets manipulated. So yes, the unemployment I think was interesting, and of course, out of that, comes. You mentioned the enterprise allowance scheme. Creation Records was virtually well on that for a while at the beginning. There were two or three of them on it, and getting money
Yes.
from it.
Well, there's a nice story. I did an interview with Simon from the Chesterfields, who've now got a new album out, and I noticed they've got a single on C85, and he was saying, well, he was on furlough last year, and they were like, it was almost like being on the enterprise allowance scheme again, and they just went, well, let's make a record. We all live in the same area. Let's kind of use that furlough scheme that the government have given us, a bit like the old days, and we'll just start rehearsing and pinging at each other cassettes. So nicely, it all comes together in one nice circular motion, holistically, isn't it, really? So the important. But the funny thing with Live Aid, because I had a friend who got me a ticket, and everyone now says, oh my God, the Live Aid, that must have been brilliant. And I remember thinking, actually, I really hated it because all these bands were the ones that I really disliked. So I was one of those grumpy people who hated Queen. I was thinking, why don't they have, Susan the Banshees? Why don't they have Aswad? Where's the Smiths? And I was just kind of, so I had to slightly tone that down, being an angsty 80s kind of indie kid who absolutely loathed the whole experience. But just kind of dragged along because a friend said, oh, I got a ticket to this gig. And it's like, wow, that's good enough for me. Let's go. But yeah, I was very disappointed at the time.
Well, yes. I mean, I mean, as I say, it was worthy. I mean, my late friend Richard Cook, the journalist, always used to say to me, "No one's made more money out of misery than Bob Geldof." But I don't want to sort of knock Live Aid because anything that helps. But that was part of the shift towards the C85, C86.
Yes. So on that front, and obviously with this compilation and good old Cherry Bread, who's always bring out collections of bands as well as these compilations, you brought out your book a few years ago. There's been another book, C86, The
Yes.
Kids of. Have you managed to sort of read a copy or get a copy of this?
I haven't read it yet. I've been deliberately sort of not wanting to read it in case it says anything nasty about me. But I'm presuming that you've read it.
Yes, I've done a little. Yeah. I've sort of, to be honest, it's one of those ones. Depending on what bands and people, because I've been doing this show and I've been trying to get a lot of the bands from that cassette, and obviously there's a couple that are impossible. Kath Carroll from Meow is really difficult, and I think there's another couple of people. Anyway, yeah, McCarthy are like really difficult. So I've been impressed with people like he's got the shop assistants that I haven't managed to track down, and also Half Man Half Biscuit Nigel. But it's a nice little ride. It's nothing. No, it's absolutely. I can't guarantee it because, but I'm pretty sure it's a very easy ride. Think Bill Bryson travels through, a small nation country, meets indie pop, and just talks about that experience. And it's like a travel log, meeting, people around the country. So it's all very easy and pleasant and good for the brand.
They did contact me to get them to help them get the rights to use the image, the C86 image.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it does. It seems very jolly and very, very cheerful, and it's a good thing that more people are writing about it.
It is good. So with you brought a fantastic book out, which I still think is one of the best music books on anything, because of the depth of it is just so incredible. It's like an academic piece, isn't it, really, in places, because of the content. Has that now sold out, that particular publication?
It keeps selling out, and we keep reprinting like small amounts, 1,000. I mean, it's currently not available, but I'd just like to reveal that we will be making it available again in the next month. So you will be able to. It will be back.
It will be back. Nice. And also, I know last year you mentioned the possibility of another book coming out on C86 or thereabouts. Is this a project that is still on the cards?
Well, I'm afraid it's not. It really is a project that is, deserves to be done, and I would like it if someone else, would take up the baton. I mean, I feel as though I'm letting people down by not agreeing to do it, and it may well, it may happen, but I've done some work on it, but not enough. But
was this the image and the artwork of that period? I can't quite remember now.
Of which period?
The 80s. What was the book? And because it was another book on that era, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Well, it was going to take the story up from 1986 to 88 because my book really does stop in May 1986.
Right.
Yes, when I'm talking about Primal Scream, I take the story on a bit. But by and large, and I take the story on for a number of bands because sadly a number of the bands imploded the following year. It's sort of grown to all the shop assistants, the Mighty Lemon Drops, all the major label signings that sort of didn't work. So it was going to take the story on.
Right. So there you go. That's a project that might get picked up, but might not. Never mind. No, I just wondered about. I thought you were also going to do a book which was going to be a bit more pictorial as well, but that might have been me.
Again, I'm not sure whether I'm not sure that will probably happen, but I'm not sure when.
Right. There you go.
I have all the material.
Well, I hope you do, because frankly, yes, that your particular publication is, I still think, one of the best in the business, because it's just such a lot of depth and knowledge that it would be a shame, not to have it back in print, really. And hopefully one day you'll get the energy for another moment to finish the decade nearly.
Yeah, I mean, the plan was to write a trilogy, which I talking now, I am sort of I'm excited about it, but it was quite exhausting. Doing C86 and all that, it was quite a lot of work. I'd have to organise it in a different way, but I mean, I can see in my head there are ways of doing it, but I'd probably rely more on written information and less on testimony given later, i.e., interviews. I know this sounds terrible, but there aren't that many people you interview who give you the kind of information that you need to deal with the moment you're working on. Because it's all done retrospectively. It would be nice to do the book and only use original source material from the time.
Right. Yes.
Easier as well. So we'll see. You're motivating me to pick up where I left off. I've just finished another book, which is a million miles away, which is basically, I think I may have mentioned it too, or you may have read about it, but I'm putting together an anthology of letters to the music press.
Oh.
From 1960 to 1995. So it's this. It's called A Million Different People, and it's it's fantastically human, fantastically warm. It's the exact opposite of rock literature, because rock literature is filled with a sort of certitude. People like me come to the table and we tell you this, and we're so right on. But this is just people writing into the papers. I mean, it may be the only thing they've ever written, and they may, maybe a letter that gets sent in and then goes away, and then they're forgotten. Many of them probably dead. So it's lovely. It's warm and human, and so I'm just sort of finishing that, really. I mean, I kind of more or less finished it this week. So we'll see what happens with that. It will be published somewhere, but I'm not sure how it will be done yet.
Oh, fantastic. Well, no, it's good. No, I hope you do get sort of that little bug. I know that, I think it was Barney Hoskins said that after his last book, he'll probably never write another book, because the kind of work and having to immerse yourself so much in this project, it does drive you slightly, into a space that you're not always emotionally wanting to go to. And I'm not saying everyone ends up as junkie, but I think a few people it takes you into a dark side, doesn't it?
I loved writing the C86 book. When I started, I found it quite difficult to get into it. The initial chapter, which really takes a look back to C81, I suppose, that period, I actually wrote that chapter, I think, last. So the first chapter of the book was the last chapter I wrote. But I actually enjoyed running through it. It was so that wasn't. But like you say, I mean, it just drains you. But I mean, I basically, if nobody else does it, I'll do it.
That's a good idea.
It's a deal.
It's a deal. And also, and you probably realise, because I can't remember, it's the I think I've got this book here. Wait a minute. There's a new publisher in town, isn't there? This one here, which is this one, 9/8 books. Everyone's writing books on 9/8 books. So yes, you'll notice that so many people, and mostly this is the 80s, but also the 90s, who've started writing their memoirs. Mickey from Lush has just got one, and the guy from World of Twist. And so I do think that there is going to be a market. And after Nigel's book, I think it would be great to see another because when people started talking about indie pop in the 90s, it felt very like, well, that's not my memory of what indie pop is at all. So I think actually that would just about kind of nicely finish it up. And would you take it to that kind of the scene of like My Bloody Valentine, Silverfish, the Faith Healers? Would that encompass, those
So,
sort of...
I loved all those bands, and I think there was some fantastic music around as sort of the 80s ended and the 90s started. I think why not? I mean, I think My Bloody Valentine were astonishing. One of the two best bands on Creation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, look, thank you ever so much for this, Neil. This has been brilliant to catch up again, and good luck on that project, a million different people, and I'll look forward to that. So, and good luck with all your further education with your children.
Okay, thanks very much, David.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a lovely day. Yeah, and look forward to the reprint as well. That's good. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. There you go, dear listener. That's how you finish a conversation. That was me in conversation with Neil Taylor, talking about the next compilation from Cherry Red Records on the indie world, or in the indie world, C85, and that's going to be coming out at the end of October 2022, featuring somewhere in the region of 72 tracks, in fact, I do believe. And it's got a brilliant booklet and great notes about each of the bands and songs especially, and a brilliant introduction from Neil Taylor, who does know his stuff. And hopefully he'll be bringing his or reprinting his book C86 and all that, the creation of indie in difficult times. And if you want to know how to get a copy of it, you could always ask me and I might be able to put you in the general direction, I think. Anyway, yes, if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just do C86 Show. And also, all these fascinating interviews have been archived and you can find those on Spotify, iTunes and Podbean. And just do C86 Show, they're all there. Keep it positive, keep it groovy. Anyway, look, have a great week and stay safe.